The first gunshot shattered the morning silence of Lincoln Elementary School at exactly 6:47 a.m., echoing through empty hallways where colorful student artwork still hung peacefully on bulletin boards. What the three heavily armed intruders breaking through the main entrance didn't know was that the soft-spoken third-grade teacher they were about to encounter in classroom 12B wasn't just Isabella Davis, beloved educator who baked cookies for parent conferences and stayed late to help struggling readers. She was Staff Sergeant Isabella Ghost Davis, former 75th Ranger Regiment, with 8 years of the most classified special operations missions the United States Army had ever conducted. And in exactly 17 minutes, these school shooters would learn the hardest lesson of their lives, that some teachers don't just educate children, they eliminate threats to them. But before we dive into this absolutely incredible story that will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about the heroes walking among us every single day, make sure you subscribe to Those Who Left a Trace for more unbelievable stories of hidden warriors who never stop protecting the innocent. Hit that notification bell, because what happens when this elementary school teacher's true identity is revealed will leave you crying tears of both fear and pride. And you won't want to miss a single second of how a woman who teaches ABCs reminded three killers that real warriors never truly retire. The small town of Millfield had always prided itself on being the kind of place where doors stayed unlocked and neighbors knew each other's children by name. Lincoln Elementary School, with its red brick facade and cheerful yellow playground equipment, sat at the heart of this community, like a beacon of innocence and learning. Parents dropped their children off each morning without a second thought about safety, trusting that the caring teachers and administrators would nurture their most precious gifts through another day of discovery and growth. Isabella Davis had been part of this idyllic picture for exactly 3 years, ever since the day she walked into Principal Anderson's office with impeccable references, a warm smile, and a teaching philosophy centered on making every child feel valued and safe in her classroom. At 29, she embodied everything parents hope for in an elementary educator: patient, creative, dedicated, and possessed of that rare gift for making learning feel like the greatest adventure a young mind could embark upon. Standing 5 feet 6 inches with a slender frame that seemed almost delicate in her carefully chosen teacher wardrobe of cardigans and sensible shoes, Isabella moved through her days with the quiet grace of someone who had found her true calling. Her chestnut brown hair was always pulled back in a neat ponytail or bun, and her warm hazel eyes had a way of lighting up when a struggling student finally grasped a difficult concept. She wore minimal makeup, favoring a natural look that made her approachable to children who might be intimidated by more formal authority figures. Her classroom was a masterpiece of educational design and child psychology. Alphabet posters covered the walls in bright primary colors, each letter accompanied by cheerful cartoon animals that helped her 15 third graders remember their phonics lessons. Tiny desks were arranged in clusters that encouraged collaboration, while a cozy reading corner filled with colorful cushions and stuffed animals provided a quiet retreat for children who needed a moment to recharge during busy school days. A small library of age-appropriate books lined one wall, carefully curated to include stories that would spark imagination while teaching valuable life lessons about friendship, courage, and kindness. What made Isabella truly special in the eyes of her colleagues was her seemingly infinite patience and creativity. She had a gift for taking the most mundane curriculum requirements and transforming them into engaging adventures. Math lessons became treasure hunts where children solved problems to find the next clue. History lessons turned into time travel experiences where students could visit ancient civilizations through elaborate role-playing exercises. Science experiments became magical demonstrations that left young minds buzzing with questions and theories about how the world worked. Parents adored her because she made each child feel like the most important student in the school. She remembered every birthday, every family vacation, every pet's name, and every small victory in a child's academic journey. When little Tommychin struggled with reading comprehension, Isabella created personalized storybooks featuring him as a hero. When Emma Thompson's parents divorced, Isabella made sure the girl had extra emotional support and opportunities to express her feelings through art and writing projects. Principal Anderson had already begun the paperwork to nominate Isabella for the district's Teacher of the Year award. Her colleagues sought her advice on classroom management and curriculum development. Student teachers begged to be assigned to her classroom because she had a reputation for being both an excellent mentor and a patient guide to the complexities of elementary education. But there were small details about Isabella Davis that no one quite understood, subtle characteristics that seemed slightly unusual for a typical elementary school teacher. She arrived at school every morning at exactly 6:30 a.m., a full hour before she was required to be there, and she always used a side entrance rather than the main doors. Her car was parked in the spot closest to her classroom's emergency exit, and she had personally requested that specific parking assignment for reasons she'd never explained. In her desk drawer, beneath the usual collection of pencils, stickers, and tissues that every elementary teacher accumulated, Isabella kept a small tactical flashlight, a basic first aid kit that was far more comprehensive than standard school supplies, and a prepaid cell phone that she'd never used but checked the battery on religiously. Her colleagues assumed these were just signs of someone who liked to be prepared for emergencies, an admirable quality in someone responsible for young children. What they didn't know was that these items were remnants of a completely different life, one that Isabella Davis had spent 3 years trying to leave behind. Before she became a beloved third-grade teacher who baked cookies for school fundraisers and volunteered to supervise weekend field trips, she had been Staff Sergeant Isabella Ghost Davis of the United States Army's most elite Special Operations Unit. Her military career had begun 8 years earlier when a 19-year-old Isabella, fresh out of small Montana high school and desperate to prove herself in a world that seemed to offer limited opportunities for young women from rural backgrounds, had walked into an Army recruitment office and signed papers that would change her life forever. What the recruiter saw was a young woman with exceptional physical fitness, off-the-chart scores on aptitude tests, and a determination that burned like a forged fire in her eyes. What the Army discovered, after 18 months of the most grueling training regimens designed to break all but the strongest candidates, was a soldier with an almost supernatural ability to move unseen through hostile territory, eliminate high-value targets with surgical precision, and lead small teams through missions that existed only in classified files so sensitive that their details would never see daylight. Isabella's 8 years in special operations had taken her to places that didn't appear on any map, where she conducted missions that saved thousands of lives by preventing terrorist attacks, eliminating threats to American interests, and gathering intelligence that shaped foreign policy decisions made in the highest levels of government. She'd earned commendations that were too classified to be displayed publicly, developed skills that civilian training couldn't replicate, and forged bonds with teammates who trusted her with their lives in situations where a single mistake meant death for everyone involved. Her transformation from warrior to teacher hadn't been voluntary. It had been necessity born from trauma, survivor's guilt, and the kind of psychological wounds that no amount of therapy could completely heal. Her final deployment had ended in an IED explosion that killed 3 of her closest teammates, men she'd served with for years, who become the brothers she'd never had, and whose loss had shattered something fundamental in her ability to function as a soldier. The transition to civilian life had been brutal. For months after a medical discharge, Isabella had struggled with severe PTSD, survivor's guilt, and a hypervigilance that made normal social interactions feel like navigating a minefield. Simple activities like grocery shopping became overwhelming exercises in threat assessment. Crowded places triggered panic attacks. The skills that had made her an exceptional soldier became liabilities in a world where violence was an acceptable solution to any problem. It was during a volunteer stint reading to children at a veterans hospital that Isabella had discovered her calling as an educator. Something about these young patients, vulnerable, trusting, eager to escape into stories about brave heroes and magical adventures, had awakened protective instinct in her that felt familiar, but fundamentally different from her military training. These children needed her not as a warrior, but as a guardian of innocence, a guide to the complexities of learning and growing up in a world that could be beautiful and terrible in equal measure. Teaching had become Isabella's path to redemption and healing. Every day spent helping children learn to read was a day spent creating rather than destroying. Every math problem solved together was proof that some challenges could be overcome through patience and persistence rather than violence. Every small victory in a child's academic journey was evidence that there were battles worth fighting that didn't require weapons or bloodshed. She'd spent 2 years earning her teaching certification while undergoing intensive therapy to address her PTSD and learn coping mechanisms for the hypervigilance that made her constantly scan for threats even in the safest environments. During this time, she'd also worked hard to develop what she called her civilian persona, the soft-spoken, gentle teacher personality that would allow her to function effectively in an elementary school environment without alarming colleagues or parents who might be uncomfortable with her military background. The process had been exhausting, but ultimately successful. By the time Isabella applied for the position at Lincoln Elementary, she'd learned to modulate her voice to the gentle tones appropriate for young children, to move with the unhurried grace of someone completely at peace with her surroundings, and project an aura of calm competence that made her the ideal candidate for working with impressionable young minds. For 3 years, this carefully constructed identity had served her well. She'd become genuinely loved by her students, respected by her colleagues, and valued by parents who saw her as the kind of teacher they'd hoped their children would be lucky enough to have. She'd learned to find joy in small moments, a child's excitement over mastering a difficult reading passage, the proud smile of a student who'd finally understood a math concept, the trust implicit in a young hand slipped into hers during a difficult moment. But underneath this peaceful exterior, Isabella's military training remained as sharp and deadly as ever. Her hypervigilance, which therapy had helped her manage but never eliminate, meant that she automatically cataloged every entrance and exit in every room she entered. She instinctively positioned herself where she could observe potential threats while maintaining the appearance of casual attention to her teaching duties. Her muscle memory retained every technique she'd learned for neutralizing armed opponents, disabling weapons, and protecting innocent civilians in hostile situations. On this particular Tuesday morning in October, as Isabella arranged new vocabulary cards on her bulletin board and reviewed lesson plans for a day that would include fractions, creative writing, and a science experiment involving magnetic fields, she had no idea that her carefully compartmentalized two lives were about to collide in the most dramatic and dangerous way possible. The first indication that something was terribly wrong came at 6:47 a.m., 13 minutes before the earliest students were scheduled to arrive for before-school tutoring. Isabella was sitting at her desk, reviewing the individualized reading assessments she prepared for 3 students who were struggling with comprehension, when she heard the unmistakable sound of gunfire echoing from somewhere near the main entrance of the building. 3 sharp cracks, spaced precisely 2 seconds apart. The rhythm of someone with firearms training, not the chaotic spray of an amateur. The sound cut through the morning quiet like a blade, immediately triggering every combat instinct that Isabella had spent 3 years learning to suppress. Her body reacted before her conscious mind fully processed what was happening, muscle memory from dozens of combat deployments flooding back with crystalline clarity. Isabella's hand moved to her desk drawer with the smooth precision of someone accessing a weapon cache. Though what she retrieved was her cell phone rather than a tactical knife she kept hidden in a secret compartment. Her breathing automatically shifted to the controlled rhythm that had carried her through firefights in hostile territory, deep and measured inhalations that kept her heart rate steady, and her mind sharp even as adrenaline began flooding her system. Moving with the silent efficiency that had earned her the nickname Ghost during her military career, Isabella positioned herself next to her classroom door, where she could observe a hallway through the small safety glass window without exposing herself to potential lines of sight from a main corridor. What she saw confirmed her worst fears and activated training protocols she'd hoped never to use again. 3 figures were moving through the main hallway with tactical precision, their movements coordinated and purposeful in ways that suggested military or law enforcement training. They wore dark clothing and tactical gear, carried what appeared to be semi-automatic weapons, and communicated through hand signals that Isabella recognized from her own special operations background. These weren't random shooters acting on impulse or emotion. They were organized, prepared, and moving with a kind of deadly efficiency that suggested extensive planning and rehearsal. Isabella speed-dialed 911, while simultaneously beginning a tactical assessment of the situation that drew on years of experience in hostile environments. Her voice was calm and professional as she reported the emergency, providing precise details about the number of intruders, their apparent equipment and training level, and their current position within the building. But even as she spoke with the emergency operator, her mind was calculating response times, analyzing the building's layout for tactical advantages and vulnerabilities, and preparing for the possibility that law enforcement wouldn't arrive in time to prevent whatever these intruders had planned. 911, what's your emergency? The operator's voice was crisp and professional, but Isabella could hear the slight tension that suggested this wasn't the first crisis call of the morning. "This is Isabella Davis at Lincoln Elementary School for 50 Maple Street," she said, her voice carrying the authoritative calm that had once directed air strikes and coordinated rescue operations in combat zones. "We have 3 armed intruders in the building. I can hear gunfire and see subjects moving with tactical coordination toward the administrative offices. I need immediate law enforcement response and medical support. Ma'am, are you in a safe location? Can you describe the subjects and their weapons?" Isabella pressed herself against the wall next to her door, using the angle to maintain observation of the hallway while minimizing her exposure. "I'm secured in classroom 12B on the 2nd floor. 3 subjects, dressed in dark tactical gear, carrying what appear to be semi-automatic rifles. They're moving in military formation and communicating through hand signals. This is not a random incident. These individuals have training and preparation." What Isabella didn't tell the 911 operator was that her assessment of the situation was far more detailed and alarming than what civilian law enforcement typically encountered. She could see that the intruders' weapons were high-end tactical rifles, not the improvised or low-quality firearms usually associated with school shootings. Their movement patterns suggested professional military or law enforcement training. Most concerning of all, their objective appeared to be the administrative offices where Principal Anderson and several staff members will be beginning their daily routines. Isabella's military experience told her that this was a spontaneous act of violence or a crime of opportunity. This was a planned operation with specific objectives, which meant the intruders had studied the building layout, knew the staff schedules, and had prepared for law enforcement response. The precision of their initial entry and the coordination of their movement suggested they intended to complete their mission quickly and efficiently before external forces could intervene. As Isabella continued providing information to the emergency operator, her mind was simultaneously running through tactical scenarios based on the building's layout, the likely response time for local law enforcement, and the potential for innocent casualties if the situation escalated. Lincoln Elementary housed approximately 400 students and 30 staff members during normal school hours, but the early morning timing meant that only a handful of people were currently in the building, primarily administrative staff and teachers who arrived early to prepare for the day. Principal Anderson would be in his office, as he was every morning by 6 a.m. The custodial staff will be finishing their cleaning routines in various parts of the building. 2 other teachers, Mrs. Patterson and Mr. Rodriguez, typically arrive by 6:30 to prepare for before-school tutoring sessions. The school secretary, nurse, and head custodian would also be in the building, along with possibly 1 or 2 maintenance workers who rotated their schedules. Most critically, the first students will begin arriving in less than 10 minutes for the voluntary before-school homework help program that served children whose parents needed to drop them off early due to work schedules. These were typically the most vulnerable students, those from single-parent households or families where both parents worked early shifts, and they trusted the school to provide a safe environment where they could complete assignments, eat breakfast, and socialize with classmates before regular classes began. Isabella's protective instincts, honed by years of combat experience and 3 years of working with children, created a tactical imperative that overrode every other consideration. She had to prevent these intruders from harming innocent people, and she had to do it with resources and in an environment completely different from anything she'd encountered during her military career. From her classroom, Isabella could hear the intruders moving through the building with systematic precision. The sound of doors being kicked open echoed from the direction of the main office, followed by shouted commands that she couldn't quite make out, but that carried the unmistakable tone of people used to being obeyed without question. There were no return voices, no sound to struggle, which suggested they were either encountering no resistance or were efficiently neutralizing any opposition they found. Isabella made a decision that would have been unthinkable just minutes earlier, but that felt as natural and necessary as breathing. She ended her call with 911, moved away from the relative safety of her locked classroom, and began to transform from Isabella Davis, beloved third-grade teacher, back into Staff Sergeant Ghost Davis, one of the most lethal close-quarters combat specialists the United States Army had ever produced. From her desk drawer, she retrieved the one item from her military career that she kept despite her therapist's strong recommendations to eliminate all reminders of her combat service, a tactical folding knife with a 4-inch blade that had saved her life during a hostage rescue operation in Afghanistan. It had been a gift from her team leader before her final deployment, inscribed with her call sign and the unit motto, "Death waits in the dark." Despite every instinct telling her to leave her past behind, she'd never been able to bring herself to destroy this tangible connection to the brothers who hadn't made it home. The knife felt familiar and deadly in her hand, its weight and balance as natural as any tool she'd ever used. But even as she prepared to engage in combat for the first time in 3 years, Isabella's mind was clear about her mission parameters. This wasn't about eliminating enemy targets or completing strategic objectives. This was about protecting innocent people who trusted her to keep them safe, and ensuring that children could continue to believe that schools were sanctuaries where learning and growth could happen without fear. The sounds in the hallway were getting closer and more urgent. Isabella could distinguish at least 3 different sets of footsteps, moving with the kind of tactical coordination that suggested extensive training and rehearsal. She could hear commands being issued in harsh whispers, the sound of equipment being deployed, and what sounded like systematic searching of rooms and offices. Isabella moved to her classroom's back entrance, a door that connected to the art room next door and provided access to a secondary hallway that ran parallel to the main corridor. Her knowledge of the building's layout, gained through 3 years of everyday use and unconsciously analyzed through the lens of her military training, had created a mental map that was as detailed and tactically useful as any blueprint. If she could reach the junction where the secondary hallway met the main corridor, she would be positioned to intercept the intruders before they could reach the main office where Principal Anderson was most likely located. More importantly, she would be between the armed subjects and the main entrance where the first students would be arriving within minutes for the before-school program. As Isabella prepared to leave the safety of her classroom and engage in combat for the first time since her medical discharge in the Army, she experienced a moment of profound clarity about the path that had brought her to this point. Every difficult day of her transition from soldier to civilian, every therapy session where she'd worked to control her hypervigilance, every patient moment spent helping a child overcome academic challenges, all of it had been preparation for this moment when her 2 identities would merge in service of the most important mission she'd ever undertaken. She was no longer Staff Sergeant Davis trying to become a teacher, or Isabella Davis trying to forget she'd ever been a soldier. She was a warrior protector whose battlefield had become an elementary school, whose mission was to ensure that innocence could survive another day, and whose weapons would be the deadly skills she'd hoped never to use again, combined with the fierce love she developed for the children who called her Miss Davis and trusted her to keep them safe. The hallway was eerily quiet when Isabella slipped out her classroom, moving with a silent precision that had made her unit legendary for stealth operations in hostile territory. Every sense was heightened to combat levels, her awareness expanding to encompass not just immediate threats, but the entire tactical environment around her. She could hear the intruders moving through the administrative wing, approximately 60 meters away, and advancing toward the main office area where the greatest concentration of staff members would be located. Isabella's movement through the building was a masterpiece of tactical infiltration, every step calculated to avoid detection while closing the distance to her targets. She used the building's architecture to her advantage, staying close to walls to minimize her visual profile, timing her movements to coincide with the ambient noise created by the intruders' own activities, and positioning herself where she could observe their approach while remaining invisible to their tactical scanning. As she moved through familiar hallways of Lincoln Elementary, past bulletin boards displaying her students' artwork, around corners where she comforted crying children, through spaces where she spent 3 years nurturing young minds, Isabella felt the strange dichotomy of being simultaneously in the most familiar and most alien environment of her life. This was her sanctuary, her place of peace and purpose, but it was also now a battlefield where the stakes couldn't be higher. The first visual contact with the intruders came as Isabella reached the junction of the secondary hallway and the main corridor. Through the reinforced glass of the safety door, she could see 2 of the 3 subjects approximately 30 meters away, moving with tactical precision toward the main office. They were heavily armed and equipped with body armor, communication gear, and what appeared to be breaching equipment designed for a forced entry through reinforced doors. What struck Isabella immediately was the professional quality of their equipment and the coordination of their movements. These weren't troubled individuals acting on impulse or emotion. They were trained operators conducting a planned mission with military precision. Their weapons were high-end tactical rifles with advanced optics. Their gear was professional-grade tactical equipment, and their movement patterns suggested extensive rehearsal and coordination. Isabella's tactical assessment of the situation became grimly clear. These intruders had planned this operation extensively. They knew the building layout and staff schedules, and they were equipped and trained to neutralize any resistance they encountered. They had entered the building during the narrow window, when only essential staff were present, before students arrived, but after key personnel would be in their offices. This suggested their primary objective was either the elimination of specific targets among the staff or the creation of a hostage situation that would maximize their leverage over responding law enforcement. Either scenario meant that innocent people were in immediate mortal danger and that law enforcement response, even if it was faster than normal, would arrive too late to prevent significant casualties. Isabella's military experience told her that operations planned with this level of detail and executed with this degree of precision typically had very short timelines and decisive objectives. These intruders intended to complete their mission and either escape or die trying, and they had the training and equipment to make either outcome likely. The sound of splintering would echo through the hallway as the intruders began their assault on the main office area. Isabella could hear Principal Anderson's voice raise in alarm, followed by harsh commands from the armed subjects that confirmed her worst fears about their intentions. There was no more time for tactical assessment or careful planning. Innocent people were being threatened with lethal force, and she was the only person in the building with the training and capability to stop it. Isabella's transformation from teacher to warrior was complete as she prepared to engage in the kind of close-quarters combat that had made her legendary among special operations units. Her mind shifted to the deadly calm of combat mode, where emotions were suppressed, tactical thinking dominated, and every action was calculated for maximum efficiency in eliminating threats while protecting innocent lives. But even as she prepared to kill for the first time in 3 years, Isabella's mission parameters were shaped by her experiences as an educator rather than her training as a soldier. She wasn't fighting to eliminate enemy combatants or achieve strategic objectives. She was fighting to protect children who trusted her, colleagues who relied on her, and a community that had welcomed her as a guardian of their most precious gifts. The next few minutes would test every skill Isabella had learned in 8 years of special operations, but more importantly, they would prove that some warriors never truly retire. They just find new missions worthy of their sacrifice and new innocents deserving of their protection. What would you do in Isabella's position? Comment below if you think this teacher is about to show these intruders that they picked the wrong school to terrorize, because what happens next will leave you absolutely breathless and remind you that the most dangerous warriors are often the ones no one sees coming. The sound of gunfire erupted from the main office area just as Isabella reached the tactical position she'd been maneuvering toward. A corner junction that would allow her to observe and engage the intruders while providing cover and concealment from their return fire. The sharp crack of rifles being discharged in the confined space of the school corridor was followed immediately by Principal Anderson's voice crying out in pain and terror, confirming Isabella's worst fears about the intruders' intentions and the immediate danger facing innocent people. Isabella's combat instincts took complete control as she assessed the tactical situation with a lightning-fast analysis that kept her alive through dozens of firefights in hostile territory. 2 of the 3 intruders were visible through the main corridor, positioned outside the principal's office with their weapons trained on targets inside the room. The 3rd intruder was not visible, which meant he was either inside the office with the hostages or positioned as a rear guard to watch for exactly the kind of interference that Isabella was about to provide. The tactical geometry of the situation was both challenging and advantageous. The intruders' focus on their primary targets had created a blind spot that Isabella could exploit, but engaging them would require moving through an open corridor where she would be exposed to return fire from multiple directions. Her only advantages were surprise, superior training, and the deadly skills she'd honed through years of combat operations that had prepared her for exactly this kind of close-quarters engagement. Isabella's approach to the engagement was a masterpiece of tactical planning executed in microseconds. Rather than attempting a direct assault that would expose her to concentrated fire from multiple opponents, she chose to use the building's architecture and her intimate knowledge of its layout to create a series of tactical advantages that would allow her to engage the intruders one at a time while minimizing their ability to coordinate their response. Moving with a silent precision that earned her the nickname Ghost, during her military career. Isabella used a maintenance corridor that ran parallel to the main hallway to position herself behind the intruder's current location. This approach vector would allow her to engage them from an unexpected direction, while placing them between her position and the main office, making it difficult for them to use their hostages as human shields during the engagement. The first contact was as sudden and decisive as any engagement from Isabella's military career. She emerged from the maintenance corridor directly behind the rear guard intruder, who had been positioned to watch the main hallway for responding law enforcement. Her approach was completely silent, and her attack was over before he could react to her presence. Isabella's hand clamped over the intruder's mouth to prevent him from alerting his companions, while her tactical knife found the precise point between his ribs that would penetrate his heart and drop him instantly, without triggering muscle spasms that might cause him to discharge his weapon. The engagement was over in less than 3 seconds, conducted with a kind of lethal efficiency that left no opportunity for the target to fight back or raise an alarm. The elimination of the first intruder was conducted with surgical precision, but also created new tactical challenges that Isabella had to address immediately. She now possessed his weapon, a high-end tactical rifle with advanced optics and a full magazine of ammunition, but she also had to prevent her companions from discovering his elimination while positioning herself for engagement with the remaining 2 subjects. Isabella's tactical decision-making in this moment reflected both her military training and her deep understanding of the innocent people she was fighting to protect. Rather than immediately pressing the attack against the remaining intruders, she took 30 seconds to ensure that Principal Anderson and any other hostages in the main office were positioned where they would be safe from crossfire during the coming engagement. Using hand signals that she hoped Principal Anderson would understand as commands to take cover, Isabella positioned herself where she could engage the remaining intruders while ensuring that any shots fired, either by her or in return, would not endanger the innocent people she was fighting to protect. This tactical consideration added complexity to an already challenging engagement, but also reflected the fundamental difference between her current mission and her military operations. Success was measured not just by the elimination of threats, but by the complete protection of innocent lives. The engagement with the second intruder occurred when he turned to check on his companion's position and discovered instead a former special operations soldier armed with his teammate's weapon and possessed the skills that he was completely unprepared to counter. Isabella's shot was precise and immediately lethal, a center mass hit that dropped him instantly without giving him the opportunity to return fire or alert the third intruder, who was still inside the principal's office. The final phase of the engagement was the most challenging from both a tactical and emotional perspective. The remaining intruder was using Principal Anderson and potentially other hostages as human shields, which meant that Isabella had to neutralize a trained opponent without endangering innocent people who were positioned in close proximity to her target. This required a kind of precision shooting that even military snipers found challenging, executed in a close-quarters environment where a missed shot could have catastrophic consequences. Isabella's solution was to create a tactical opportunity rather than waiting for one to develop naturally. Using her voice for the first time since the engagement began, she identified herself as law enforcement and demanded the intruder surrender, knowing that he would respond by positioning himself to engage what he assumed was a responding police officer. This gave her the split-second opportunity she needed to take a precision shot that eliminated the threat without endangering the hostages. The engagement was over in less than 4 minutes from the moment Isabella had first heard gunfire, but those 4 minutes had required every skill she'd learned in 8 years of special operations and had tested her ability to function as a warrior while maintaining her identity as a protector of innocence. When the shooting stopped, 3 dangerous criminals were dead, Principal Anderson was wounded but alive, and the school was secure. But Isabella's mission wasn't complete until she had ensured that the building was completely safe and that all innocent people were accounted for and protected. She spent the next 10 minutes conducting a systematic search of the entire facility, clearing every classroom and office to ensure that there were no additional threats and that no staff members or early arriving students had been harmed during the engagement. The aftermath of the engagement was as challenging as the combat itself, as Isabella had to transition from warrior back to teacher while dealing with traumatized colleagues, investigating law enforcement officers, and the knowledge that she had just killed 3 people in the building where she taught children about kindness, cooperation, and peaceful problem solving. Principal Anderson, despite his injuries, was coherent enough to provide investigators with a detailed account of Isabella's actions that confirmed what the security camera footage had captured. A trained professional eliminating a deadly threat with surgical precision while ensuring the complete protection of innocent lives. The investigation that followed would classify most details of the engagement, but it would also lead to commendations for Isabella that will remain sealed in files too sensitive for public release. The students and parents of Lincoln Elementary would never know the complete truth about what had happened that morning, but they would learn that their beloved Miss Davis had somehow saved everyone in the building from what officials described as a planned terrorist attack. The story that emerged publicly was carefully crafted to protect both Isabella's privacy and the classified nature of her background, but established her as a hero whose actions had prevented an unthinkable tragedy. When Isabella returned to her classroom the following week, after extensive debriefing sessions with federal investigators, psychological evaluation to ensure she was fit to return to her teaching duties, and medical treatment for minor injuries sustained during the engagement, she found that nothing and everything had changed. Her students still needed help with fractions, her bulletin board still displayed their colorful artwork, and her reading corner still provided a cozy refuge for children who needed a quiet moment during busy days. But Isabella herself had changed in ways that would affect her teaching for the rest of her career. She had proven to herself that she could use her warrior skills to protect rather than destroy, that her military training could serve the cause of education and child development, and that there was no contradiction between being a deadly protector and a nurturing educator. The integration of these two identities made her not just a better teacher, but a more complete human being who could embrace all aspects of her experience in service of the children who trusted her with their safety and their futures. The children in her classroom never learned the details of what their teacher had done to protect them, but they sensed that Miss Davis was somehow even more special than they had previously understood. She was still patient with their mistakes, creative in her teaching methods, and dedicated to their academic and emotional growth. But there was also a new quality in her presence, a quiet confidence and strength that made them feel absolutely safe in her care. Isabella's story became legend among the law enforcement and military communities that were cleared to know the details, but she never sought recognition or publicity for her actions. She had done what needed to be done to protect the innocent people she cared about, and that was reward enough. The knowledge that her students could continue learning and growing in safety, that parents could trust their children to her care, and that a community's faith in the sanctuary of education had been preserved was worth more than any medal or commendation. Years later, when some of her students were old enough to understand what had happened at Lincoln Elementary, they would learn that their gentle, patient teacher who had helped them learn to read and write and think critically about the world had also been their guardian angel during the most dangerous morning of their young lives. They would understand that heroes don't always wear uniforms or carry badges. Sometimes they wear cardigans and grade papers, and make sure that the reading corner has enough cushions for everyone who needs a quiet moment to recharge. Isabella Davis continued teaching at Lincoln Elementary for many more years, nurturing thousands of young minds and proving every day that warriors can become educators, that protectors can be nurturers, and that the most important battles are often fought not with weapons, but with patience, creativity, and an unwavering commitment to ensuring that innocence can flourish in a world that sometimes threatens to destroy it. The scar on her left shoulder from a piece of shrapnel during her final military deployment remained hidden beneath her teacher cardigans, but it served as a daily reminder that some people are called to serve in multiple ways throughout their lives. The tactical knife that saved her life in Afghanistan and protected her students at Lincoln Elementary was returned to its place of honor in her desk drawer, where it remained as both a symbol of her past and a promise of her continued readiness to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. But perhaps most importantly, Isabella's story became proof that the transition from warrior to civilian didn't have to mean abandoning the values and skills that made someone effective in combat. Instead, those qualities could be channeled into new missions, teaching children, protecting innocence, and ensuring that the next generation grew up in a world where education could flourish without fear. Every morning when Isabella arrived at Lincoln Elementary at exactly 6:30 a.m., she carried with her the knowledge that she was living proof that heroes aren't born. They're forged through experience, shaped by adversity, and defined by their willingness to use their gifts in service of others. Whether those gifts were expressed through precision elimination of armed threats or the patient instruction of a struggling reader, they all serve the same fundamental mission: protecting and nurturing the future of humanity. And so Miss Davis continued to teach, to learn, and grow alongside her students, secure in the knowledge that she had successfully integrated every aspect of her identity into a life of service that honored both her military service and her calling as an educator. The children in her classroom were safer because of her past, but they were also blessed with a teacher whose understanding of sacrifice, courage, and service added depth and meaning to every lesson she taught about character, perseverance, and the importance of standing up for what's right. The weeks following the incident brought changes to Lincoln Elementary that were both visible and invisible to the school community. Security protocols were updated. Emergency response procedures were revised, and counseling services were made available to help staff and students process the trauma of knowing their safe haven had been threatened. But the most significant change was in the way people looked at Isabella Davis. Not with suspicion or fear, but with profound respect that went beyond typical admiration for teachers. Principal Anderson, who had been wounded but survived thanks to Isabella's intervention, never spoke publicly about the specific details of what he had witnessed that morning. But in private conversations with school board members, parent leaders, and district administrators, he made it clear that Isabella Davis was not just an exceptional teacher. She was someone whose presence at Lincoln Elementary represented a level of security and protection that no amount of technology or policy could replicate. The parent of Isabella's students noticed subtle changes in their children's behavior and attitudes following the incident. While the children had been protected from most of the traumatic details, they seemed to carry themselves with a new confidence and sense of safety. When asked about school, they spoke about Miss Davis with an almost reverent affection that went beyond typical student-teacher relationships. She wasn't just their teacher. She was their guardian, their protector, their unshakable source of safety in an uncertain world. Isabella herself found that the integration of her two identities, warrior and educator, created unexpected opportunities for deeper and more meaningful teaching. Her understanding of courage wasn't theoretical. It was earned through experience. Her lessons about perseverance weren't based on inspirational quotes from books. They came from personal knowledge of what it meant to continue fighting when everything seemed hopeless. Her instruction about character and integrity carried the weight of someone who had been tested in the most extreme circumstances and had chosen to use her strength to protect rather than harm. The classroom dynamics that had always been positive became even more extraordinary as Isabella discovered that her military experience could enhance rather than complicate her teaching methods. Her ability to remain calm under pressure helped her manage classroom crises with unprecedented effectiveness. Her tactical planning skills translated into lesson designs that anticipated and addressed potential learning obstacles before they became problems. Her leadership experience enabled her to inspire confidence and motivation in students who had previously struggled with self-doubt. Most importantly, Isabella's students began to understand that strength and gentleness weren't contradictory qualities. They were complementary aspects of true character. Miss Davis was living proof that someone could be simultaneously tough enough to face any challenge and tender enough to help a crying child, strong enough to protect others from harm and patient enough to explain a difficult concept for the 100th time until every student understood. The ripple effects of Isabella's actions extended far beyond Lincoln Elementary. Her story, carefully edited to protect classified details and her privacy, became a case study in emergency response training programs across the country. Law enforcement agencies use her tactical decisions as examples of how to engage multiple armed subjects in a school environment while protecting civilian lives. Military training programs incorporated her experience as a demonstration of how special operation skills could be adapted for civilian protection scenarios. But perhaps most significantly, Isabella's story began to change conversations about the value and capabilities of military veterans in civilian careers. She became an example of how the discipline, training, and character developed through military service could be channeled into civilian professions in ways that enhanced rather than complicated their effectiveness. Her success as a teacher wasn't despite her military background. It was enhanced by the qualities that military service had developed in her. Educational conferences began inviting Isabella to speak about classroom management, crisis response, and the integration of military veterans into teaching careers. Her presentations were always carefully crafted to protect operational details, while highlighting the transferable skills that made veterans exceptional educators. She spoke about the importance of situational awareness in understanding student needs, the value of tactical planning in curriculum development, and the way that military discipline could be adapted to create structured learning environments where all students could succeed. Isabella's influence on her students extended well beyond their elementary school years. The children who had been in her classroom during and after the incident carried with them a unique understanding of courage, sacrifice, and service that shaped their character development throughout their academic careers. Many of them credited Miss Davis with teaching them not just reading and math, but the fundamental values that guided their decisions about how to treat others, how to respond to challenges, and how to use their own talents in service of something greater than themselves. Some of her former students chose military careers, inspired by their teacher's example of service and sacrifice. Others became educators themselves, hoping to create the same sense of safety and inspiration that Miss Davis had provided for them. Still others pursued careers in law enforcement, emergency response, or public service, driven by lessons about protection, courage, and the responsibility that comes with having the ability to help others. The long-term impact of Isabella's teaching was measured not just in test scores or academic achievements, but in the character and values of the adults her students became. They grew up understanding that heroes weren't mythical figures from movies or books. They were real people who chose to use their gifts to protect and serve others. They learned that strength was most valuable when it was used to defend those who couldn't defend themselves, and that true courage wasn't the absence of fear, but the willingness to act despite fear when others needed protection. Isabella continued teaching at Lincoln Elementary for 15 more years, becoming a beloved institution whose influence shaped thousands of young lives. She never sought publicity or recognition for her heroic actions, preferring to let her daily work as an educator speak for itself. But her reputation within the educational community grew as word spread about a teacher whose classroom management was legendary, whose students consistently outperformed expectations, and whose ability to handle any crisis with calm competence made her a resource that principals and superintendents treasured. The tactical knife that saved her life in Afghanistan and protected her students at Lincoln Elementary was eventually joined in her desk drawer by other mementos of a life dedicated to service. Thank you notes from students who had overcome learning disabilities with her help, photographs from graduation ceremonies of former students who had gone on to successful careers, and letters from parents whose children have been transformed by her patient guidance and unwavering belief in their potential. When Isabella finally retired from teaching at the age of 55, the celebration held in her honor was attended by hundreds of former students, colleagues, and community members whose lives had been touched by her service. The event wasn't just a retirement party. It was a testament to the profound impact that one person could have when they chose to dedicate their gifts to protecting and nurturing others. The speeches that evening included tributes from former students who had become doctors, teachers, engineers, and public servants, all crediting Miss Davis with teaching them the values that had guided their career choices and personal development. Colleagues spoke about her mentorship and the way she had raised the standard of excellence for the entire school district. Parents thanked her for creating a classroom environment where their children had not only learned academic skills, but had also developed the confidence and character that would serve them throughout their lives. But the most meaningful tribute came from Principal Anderson, who had been saved by Isabella's actions 2 decades earlier and had watched her transform the culture of education throughout the district. He spoke about a teacher who had proven that the qualities that made someone an exceptional warrior, courage, discipline, selflessness, and an unwavering commitment to protecting others, were the same qualities that made someone an exceptional educator. Isabella Davis didn't just teach children how to read and write, Principal Anderson said in his remarks that evening. She taught them how to be brave, how to be kind, how to stand up for what's right, and how to use their talents in service of others. She showed them that strength and gentleness aren't opposites. They're partners. And she proved every day that the most important battles aren't always fought with weapons, but with patience, dedication, and absolute refusal to give up on the people you're called to protect. Isabella's response to the tributes was characteristically humble and focused on the students rather than herself. She spoke about the privilege of being trusted with young minds, the joy of watching children discover their capabilities, and the honor of being part of a profession that shaped the future one student at a time. She credited her military service not as a burden she had overcome, but as preparation that had made her a better teacher, a more effective protector, and a more complete human being. Every day in the classroom was a mission, Isabella told the gathered crowd. Not a mission to defeat enemies or capture objectives, but a mission to unlock potential, to build confidence, to teach values, and to ensure that every child who entered my classroom left knowing that they were valued, capable, and worthy of every opportunity this world has to offer. The skills I learned as a soldier, the discipline, the attention to detail, the ability to stay calm under pressure, the commitment to never leave anyone behind, all of those qualities served me well as a teacher. Because protecting children and nurturing their growth is the most important mission anyone can undertake. After her retirement, Isabella remained active in veteran affairs and educational advocacy, working to help other former military personnel transition into teaching careers. She consulted with school districts on crisis response protocols, mentored new teachers who were veterans struggling with the transition to civilian careers, and spoke at conferences about the value of military experience in educational settings. Her story became part of the curriculum at teacher training programs, where future educators learn about classroom management, crisis response, and the integration of life experience into teaching methods. Military transition programs began using her example to show veterans that their skills and training could be valuable assets in civilian careers that might seem completely unrelated to their military experience. But Isabella's most lasting legacy was the thousands of students whose lives have been shaped by her teaching, her example, and her unwavering commitment to their safety and success. They carried forward the lessons she had taught them about courage, character, and service, passing those values on to their own children and communities in an endless ripple effect of positive influence. The elementary school classroom where Isabella had spent the most meaningful years of her life was eventually dedicated as the Davis Learning Center, honoring not just her heroic actions during the crisis, but her decades of exceptional service as an educator. The plaque beside the door bore a simple inscription that captured the essence of her remarkable career, dedicated to Isabella Davis, who taught us that the greatest warriors are those who fight for the future, and that the most important victories are achieved one student at a time. Years later, when former students would tell their own children about their elementary school teacher who had been their hero, their protector, and their inspiration, they would struggle to find words adequate to describe someone who had been simultaneously the gentlest and strongest person they had ever known. How do you explain to a child that their teacher had once been a deadly warrior who chose to use her strength to help them learn to read? How do you describe someone who could eliminate armed threats with surgical precision and also spend hours patiently helping a struggling student understand a math concept? The answer, Isabella's former students learned, was that you didn't need to explain the contradiction because there wasn't one. Isabella Davis had simply been living proof that true strength was always used in service of others, that real courage was expressed through protection rather than aggression, and that the highest calling for any warrior was to ensure that future generations could grow up in safety, with hope, and with the knowledge that there would always be someone willing to stand guard while they learned and grew and became the best versions of themselves. In the end, Isabella's story became more than just an account of a teacher who had once been a soldier or a soldier who had become a teacher. It became a testament to the possibility of integration, growth, and service that transcended any single identity or career. She had proven that people could change without abandoning who they were, that they could use every aspect of their experience in service of others, and that the most meaningful battles were often fought not on distant battlefields, but in the everyday moments where character was built, minds were opened, and futures were shaped. And somewhere in a quiet suburban classroom, a new teacher arranged bulletin boards and prepared lesson plans, carrying forward the legacy of someone who had shown that teaching was indeed a form of service, that education was a kind of protection, and that the most important mission anyone could undertake was ensuring that children could learn and grow in safety, surrounded by adults who would never stop fighting for their right to become everything they were meant to be. I ask you now, have you ever encountered someone like Isabella Davis? Someone whose quiet strength and hidden depths reminded you that heroes walk among us every day, often in the most unexpected places? Share their story in the comments below, because these are the people who make our communities safer, our schools better, and our children more prepared for whatever challenges they might face. Thank you for watching this incredible story of courage, service, and the power of choosing to use your gifts to protect rather than harm. If this moved you, make sure you're subscribed to those who left a trace for more amazing stories of hidden heroes who never stopped serving their communities. Hit that notification bell so you never miss these powerful reminders that the most important battles are often fought by people whose names we never learn, whose sacrifices go unrecognized, and whose only reward is knowing that they've made the world a little safer for the innocent people they've sworn to protect. Because in the end, that's what real heroes do. They serve without seeking recognition, they protect without asking for thanks, and they prove every day that the greatest strength is always used in service of others. Isabella Davis was one of those heroes, and her story reminds us that warriors never really retire. They just find new missions worthy of their dedication.